So thank you. I don't know if this is working. No? Hello? Okay. Yeah, thank you for coming out tonight. We're going to talk about setting up a culture of change. We're really in early days of cloud adoption in the federal market. Actually, February will mark the 7th year of Cloud First strategy, or I'm sorry, policy. And right now we're seeing just 8.5% of the IT spend in cloud. So before we jump in, I'd love to ask a few questions. Darryl, I'll start with you. As the Director of Digital Innovation and Solutions at DHS headquarters, what's your role in cloud adoption?
So my role, I have actually, okay, fantastic. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for taking some time out to listen to some of my comments today. In my role, I have two facets. The first facet is specifically exploring innovation through venture, through startups, as well as doing proof of concept activities. So when we talk about market intelligence and what our incubation channel is, it is actually based on the ability to identify needs throughout the department and connect those with certain solutions, and not necessarily target solutions for the sake of the solution. I also utilize the market intelligence to create knowledge management, which we're able to then share with other parts of the department, as well as share with other members of our team. The other facet that I have or responsible for in my portfolio is that I am responsible for the application lifecycle shared service across the department with over 3,000 users. I also have the mobile application vetting under my portfolio, as well as exploring an activity called Cloud Factory, in which we are looking at developing an environment on top of a high instance. So putting a number of tools to limit the amount of lock-in that we would have in regards to going to the cloud, and also having conversations with our operational team in order to understand their requirements, their needs. So as we transition, we are able to develop effective strategies for not only migrations, but also looking at various approaches. I would also like to say that we also are very focused on the people too. So communication with the folks that we have in. A lot of times we are impacted or have technology pushed upon us, but it's not a collaborative environment. So we do a lot of knowledge transfer sessions as well, in which we educate. So therefore, there's an opportunity for education. So when we think about Office 365 or Windows 10 or Dynamics 365 or one of those other products, we can actually bring in Microsoft to come talk to our team, to come answer some of the questions prior to the final implementation, which is very effective in the change management process. So as far as my role, not only in acquisitions, but also in management of a very dynamic team, that is pretty much my role in cloud. Now, I have definitely relationships with many of the components. Many of them you are familiar with as far as their evolution in the cloud, and they have been very good in sharing some of the wins, but I usually say that I'm in the dots and bridges business. So therefore, I'm responsible for connecting problems to solutions, as well as creating bridges in relationships that need to be made in order to advance the missions of the agency. Thank you.
Sounds like you're a pretty busy guy.
Fairly.
Okay. We'll have a lot to talk about tonight. Syed, just from a form of introduction to you, when you're not at the Department of Labor, you're the advocacy lead for the Federal Cloud Center of Excellence that I think launched in January, so you're coming out in 1 year. That's very exciting. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody for showing up today. I think that shows that you care. The Federal Cloud Center of Excellence was an effort that was set up at GSA, but it's really an interagency group consisting of lots of agencies. We have over 40 agencies and components that are representative, and we have over 150 members. And what we're really all about is we're a grassroots organization. We realized that cloud adoption is not really merely a technical problem. There's lots of change management, kind of what Darryl alluded to, people, processes, and ultimately the bureaucracy, right? There's always somebody telling us you can't do that, and our job is to figure out, yes, you can, and also taking the pockets of excellence that exist within different parts of the federal government taking those best practices, those lessons learned, documenting them, sharing them widely. So as part of that, we have lots of best practices guides. We came up with a document called the Castle Guide, which shares a lot of those best practices in terms of not just the technical aspects of cloud adoption and cloud migration, but also some of the contractual concerns, consumption-based billing, to name a few. We're also working on some other exciting things that I'll probably touch upon as we go further. But really, my role at the CCOE is connecting the members with the larger organization. I do also a lot of outreach with organizations such as yourself, with the media, and making sure that, you know, the people who are doing the cloud practitioners in the federal government, they're talking to each other, because as Govies, we tend to keep our head low and just be focused on the mission, but we don't necessarily talk to each other. And second, also talking and engaging with the vendor community. I think those two are key to finding the solutions and making sure that, you know, we move past the 8 or 9% cloud adoption metric. Gartner came out with a projection for federal cloud adoption, and they think very optimistically that, you know, we're going to be, in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be like 70 or 80%. You know, if I had a Christmas wish, I would love that to come true, but I don't think we're going to get there with the status quo. I think we really need to push things and make sure, you know, it all starts with engagement and information sharing. So that's what we do at the CCOE.
That's amazing. So right now, we definitely have the hashtag change agents here that we like to use when we track, you know, movers and shakers in the federal adoption world. So moving from just introducing yourselves, wanted to talk about the current state of cloud and cloud adoption. Syed, I think you were already touching on that. If you think about the federal cloud adoption journey, where are we in that journey right now?
I would say we're definitely past the infancy stage. You know, we're not an infant anymore. We've kind of like a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of cloud use cases and applications, I think that has been plucked. You know, lots of commodity costs, email as a service, all that stuff, content management. I think what we're looking at, we're kind of becoming the toddler. We're, you know, learning to crawl and maybe hopefully walk soon. And we're looking at some of the more complex use cases, some of the complex implementation. We're realizing, you know, there's certainly a knowledge and expertise gap. Like I said, the government doesn't have all the answers, and the traditional model has been, you know, we're going to figure it all out, and we're going to write the requirements, and we're going to throw it over the fence. And, you know, the industry gets it, and they scratch their head. They said, this doesn't make sense, right? So that certainly needs to change for us to make more meaningful impact in terms of cloud adoption.
I believe that I agree with your assessment. We're still early. There is still work to be done. A lot of folks focus in on the technology and saying, well, we don't have this tool, we don't have this product, but it's a universal strategy. Because when we talk about the moving of the cheese, we have to be able to understand that there are folks that are working every day in a data center. There are folks who are more familiar with a traditional mindset than a modern mindset, and being able to understand what that new model looks like. When you talk to a network operator and say, well, you need to create a platform operations team, what does that mean to me? And how does that affect my position? And what is something that I have to learn? So I think from a technology perspective, the vehicles, the guides, the products are all there. I think from a business process perspective, as well as from a personnel perspective, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think it has to start with the question of why. Why go to the cloud? Why is it important? Why is it essential? Right? We can't go to the cloud just for cloud's sake. We have to also assess what that brings us, what that gives us. So when I say that a ATO process takes a little bit more than 6 to 9 months, that doesn't seem attractive because you, as a developer, want to make sure you get that product out. Because, and I was mentioning this earlier, that the CIO of Estonia says that the regular citizens interact with the government maybe 1.6 times per year. Now, if you did not work in the government environment, how much do you really interact with the government? About 1.6 times per year. Maybe tax season, right? And maybe you have something else that you want to research as far as the government is concerned. So given that, we have to actually focus on creating that immaculate customer experience for that end user, because we only get 1 or 2 shots at that per year. So that's the reason why we're trying to improve the way that we deliver customer experience and look at the way, or change the way we do customer engagement, because we don't have that many opportunities. But some of our missions are so critical that if we fail, there's many ramifications. I can remind you of 4 hurricanes that happened earlier this year. And if we don't have all the tools in place, then it puts us in a bad spot. And we are definitely pragmatists, and we need to move it forward.
I just want to go back to what you just said in terms of change management. One of the things we've been working at CCOE is a personas guide for cloud computing, and what it really does is, so say you're a network engineer in the traditional IT shop. In the cloud world, these are the skills or expertise or knowledge you need to know to be able to be successful. And some of the success stories with respect to cloud, with FCC's David Bray, the former CIO, one of the things he shared, that making sure that the workforce, the people, they understand why we're doing it, right, and equipping them for the success and the knowledge. Another thing I wanted to add with respect to the mission, just a couple of days ago I was reading the news. One of the DHS, I used to work at DHS, but I started my federal career at DHS. I was there for 5 years. But one of their DHS, CBP's mission critical systems was offline for 3 or 4 hours, right? You'd say, well, why does it matter? Well, 13,000 people at the airports were stranded, right? That's what happened. And that's just one small example. At a certain point, the work we're doing, it really affects people's lives. It's not just, oh, well, an executive didn't get a report. It's people's life with the hurricane season. And there's countless examples with the IRS breach. I can go on and on, right?
Okay, there we go. So kind of going back to the idea of that we're 7 years in, right? And we haven't even reached 10% cloud adoption. So, but we have done 10%. So what's in that 10%? What are the early kind of efforts that you're seeing in cloud adoption?
When you think about, when you think about technology, no. Okay. When you think about the concept, so when we talk about that 10%, we have to assess, what are we saying, right? Are we talking about the multi-cloud aspect, where we're looking at infrastructure, PaaS, and SaaS environments? Are we looking at the hybrid cloud, where we're looking at various CSPs that we're leveraging? So being able to quantify that or make it more specific would actually, start to shape what are we thinking about. Because if you are using Salesforce in your environment, or you're using some other SaaS tool in your environment, essentially you are in the cloud, right? It's part of that conversation. Now, if we say, how are we enabling our developers? How are we enabling those who are dependent upon automation and delivery? Well, that's a different discussion, right? And us moving that forward is really important. So when we think about automation and creation of CI/CD pipelines and the creation of ongoing authorization models that actually expedite the ATO process, that is a conversation that then shifts and say, well, yeah, we're doing well in the SaaS provider. People are able to get their favorite tools, but at the same time, is that really enabling the mission tools that we still have developers working on?
Is that the shadow kind of IT that, or is this like central CIO that you're seeing the early cloud adoption motions?
I would say not as much shadow IT. So if we think about, and I don't know how many enterprise architects we have, there's some tools that are on the TRM that are actually SaaS tools. It's just the exploration, right? The leader wants to move forward with certain products, and then they take that leap of faith to say that this is the product based on the use case. I often say that, and as a system engineer, the focus has to be the AOA, right? So the analysis of alternatives and saying, well, this is the best product for me, right? This is the best product versus an on-prem product because of cost, because of scalability, because of sustainability, because of reliability. Some of those abilities that are still there in conversations we still need to have, and that's where we can pivot to a new direction.
I would say that in terms of early adoption and some of the success stories, what I've seen in my experience working at DHS, at DoD, at Treasury, and now at Labor, is you really need an engaged customer who understands the benefits of the cloud, right? If they're just doing it that somebody's telling them, hey, you need to go to the cloud, it's probably not going to be successful because they're not going to have realistic expectations. A lot of times I hear IT programs saying, well, we thought if we went to the cloud, we'll have 50% or some ridiculous number of cost savings. Yes, you can get there eventually, but right on the onset, you're not going to have those cost efficiencies or savings, especially if you're doing lift and shift, right? You're not going to get there. You're not going to have better security if you're kind of doing what you were doing on-prem. Now you're just in an IaaS environment. So you really need an engaged customer. And in my personal experience, one of the successes I've had in getting stakeholders, programs, customers to really buy into the cloud is to speak their language, right? And I'll give one quick example. At one agency when I worked at, I had an executive who I worked for. And I got to know this person really well, right? I figured out that they were former military intelligence person, right? So the way I spoke to this executive was in his language, right? And when I talked about cloud, I didn't talk about the cool things that it will do for me or my organization, the testing, the automation, the CI/CD pipelines, better security. I talked about how the intelligence community, especially the CIA, they have the largest private cloud implementations to date, right? Speaking the customer's language and meeting them where they are and understanding where they're coming from, I think that's key, because we can communicate the benefits of the cloud all day long, but it has to be tied back to the mission and also what that stakeholder's, I guguess, perspective is.
So getting to challenges, right? Given that we're in early days and we've been doing some cloud adoption, what are the main factors driving cloud adoption? And what are the major obstacles facing these adoption efforts?
So I write on my whiteboard. I draw stick figures all the time. And one of the things that I start out with is security. We want to have security baked in day one. Right? We don't want to have to worry about that experience. And looking at the 853, FIPS 199, you have over 400 controls that you have to account for. To do that from scratch is a very laborious task. And often, and I mentioned it to you earlier, that the NIST Quick Start guides that are being provided by some of the CSPs are actually helping that with that control mapping that is needed. So that is actually taking time off the table, and we're actually able to move things forward in a more expedited clip.
You're speaking to the ATOs?
Yes.
Yes.
Of course. So it's increased security, but also reducing the time it takes to receive your authority to operate. So that's one of the areas. The other is the investment, right? We want to make sure that the investment moves from the O&M to the DME. So it's not necessarily saying that we get more money on the DME side. It's saying that we're able to recapitalize on the investments that we make. The other conversation is about the personnel. There's a lot of debate about how technology is impacting the labor force and things of that nature, or will it actually result in more productivity as a nation? But at the same time, it's saying, well, if we have better technology and we have fewer resources, how do we train our people up? Because technology is moving so fast, how do you educate And how do you change the model that traditionally says, okay, well, you work your 40 hours, and if you get training, it's outside of it, or you go through a degree program, versus saying, okay, well, we need you to take this class just in time so that this way you can be more effective in your new role. The other conversation I have is around the process, and automation being part of that process. And saying that with automation, we're able to now take a man out of the loop. And I'm not talking pineapple, but I'm talking that from the perspective of we are able to move through that pipeline without having to transition into security and test and worry about the defects that come back. We don't have to go through the engineering review board anymore. We're able to automate a lot of that and then have a risk management board that is able to evaluate what are some of the outputs from that. The other conversation that I have is around infrastructure, right? Heating and cooling is expensive. But the IT guys don't talk about it because the facilities guys have to worry about the heating and the cooling. So it's being able to have that conversation and be able to reduce your overall footprint, which is, you know, kind of conversation around the colo versus the cloud and having that. But that's the dialogue that we need to have. And last, quality, right? Quality aligns with the metrics. So we saw a lot of advancements in the dashboards that are being created, and even how there are other tools that are helping with the monitoring of these various platforms, and that's being automated. So moving away from the traditional spreadsheet format into an actual automated method of communicating to your executives as well as to other stakeholders.
There's actually a study out there about Excel spreadsheets. It's a little random, but billions of dollars in productivity are lost just because of Excel. Nothing against Excel, just spreadsheets in general. Google Sheets. Google Sheets. Billions of dollars in productivity is lost just because of misaligned formulas and errors in spreadsheets. So the more we can reduce manual reporting and calculations and all that stuff, that's great. I think Darryl touched upon a lot of great things. Going back to your question, the drivers, I think we covered the drivers pretty well. Maybe I can talk a little about the inhibitors, right, or the blockers, as we like to call in Scrum. One of the biggest blockers is, again, culture, right? You can't buy DevOps, right? When somebody says, I want to get DevOps, right? You can't get it because it's part of the culture, right? Yeah, the tools and technologies are necessary. You need that. You need the process. You need the training. But that's maybe 20% of it. Same thing with some of the newer developmental methodologies, right? Agile and Scrum and XP and all that. So culture, to me, really, everybody says, we want to change the culture. You know, how do we change the culture, right? Of course, it's a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight. But the things that we can do to drive culture, you know, it's kind of like global warming or climate change, right? You can't impact it directly overnight. You have to do a lot of different things to drive that change gradually. One of the things I talked about was having more engagement, having more conversation, doing these knowledge sharing sessions, such as like this one with the CCOE and other groups. That's one, you know, having those conversations. Number two is having that different mindset, right? I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I said, you know, if you have this mindset as an employee that, you know, you're going to learn one thing and do it forever, and if that's something that was rewarded in the past, right? That's no longer going to be the case, and you're going to get left behind. So you really need to be in mindset, not just in the tech world, but any industry that, you know, it's going to be lifelong learning, lifelong change, lifelong self-improvement. Another inhibitor, so I talked about culture. The other thing I have that's pretty big on my list as part of the Cloud Center of Excellence is some of our contracting rules are really from, you know, World War II era, right? Where we're purchasing not even IT, but you know, planes and ships. You know, actually, the former USCIS CIO Mark Schwartz talked a lot about that when he was at DHS. A lot of the rules that even when I was at DHS in terms of IT procurement and IT acquisition came from the DoD world, right? So we're still not there in terms of a lot of these policies are designed not for the agile world, not for a cloud-enabled environment. Therefore, at best, you know, CapEx, capital-intensive IT. So we need to change some of that. As part of the CCOE, we're always trying to find workarounds and best practices given the current Who's heard of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, right? Yeah, so given the complexities of the FAR, without changing it, how best we can do cloud contracts, right? But there are some fundamental changes that are needed if we are going to realize a lot of the benefits of the cloud, right? Cloud is not something that you buy knowing exactly how many units you're going to purchase or knowing the pricing up front. You know, the pricing fluctuates. A lot of the new offerings that were not available yet last month, you know, maybe Azure or AWS have them today. So I see that those some as blockers, but I don't think they're like insurmountable. I definitely think that there's workarounds. So anybody, you know, throws up their hands and says, well, we just can't do it, you know, I don't buy that.
So we can't talk about blockers without talking about recommendations. So, so along those lines, when organizations, federal organizations are developing their cloud strategies, what are some of the elements that they should include in their strategies? And who are the key stakeholders that definitely should be involved?
I'll let you take this one.
In terms of strategies for cloud, you know, I've seen a lot of strategies, and you know, I think we're probably past strategies right now. There's a lot of good work that has been done, right, across the government, currently at the CCOE, but also some other agencies, right? So talk to, if you're on the industry, if you're on the government side, talk to somebody who's done that kind of project or procurement before, right? Oftentimes industry has a role to play connecting the customers together, because like I said, you would think that we talk across the government, but we don't. Oftentimes we don't. So we don't know. Yeah, I'll use an example. You know, some sort of identity solution, right? Cloud-based. One agency has done it. You know, at the high level, they have a lot of great lessons to learn. Talk to them. I think that's number one. You can do your market research. That's great, but getting there with the security aspect, the funding aspect, the contracts aspect, those are some of the major issues that the government faces. I think, and the other thing I wanted to say was, in terms of strategy, you know, there's a lot of great work that has been done. Just leverage that. Do not try to recreate the wheel. Unless you have some very high use case, some very highly specialized use case that nobody has done before. I see a lot of departments trying to create some very intricate frameworks and strategies where they'll set up the cloud broker office and they'll spend 2 years creating the strategy. If you don't implement something successful and something working, I say within a year or two, you really need to rethink your strategy, because that's just not going to cut it.
That's a good segue, because my next question is, how do you jumpstart these cloud implementations? What advice you'd give, you know, IT leadership on just moving the ball forward and jumping in?
A lot of things that I say in regards to any strategy, it starts with creating alignment with your team. So culture became part of a big part of that discussion. There is also a need to perform an assessment of your organization to see what it is that you have, to see what it is that you are investing in, to see where are some of the challenges that you are experiencing. And then also doing the application rationalization, in which you are then looking at what workloads, what applications would be ideal candidates to move, because all of them may not necessarily be ideal. When you do that, that actually creates a conversation around where do we see at the end of the tunnel. And one of the things I used to apply when I did strategy for other organizations is usually strategy comes down to a couple of objectives, right? What are you trying to increase, decrease, start, or stop? It's 4 things, right? And when you look at it from that perspective, well, if you're trying to increase productivity or reduce the amount of time for ATO or start utilizing other platforms that actually don't require to have a Patch Tuesday or any of those conversations, then that's where it really becomes attractive. And then once you create that strategy, you pull in the necessary stakeholders and educate them on why they should be concerned about this and what it will do to impact their environment. Because I'm sure those conversations are happening anyway. But if you're able to monitor that strategy with that end goal, that's where you get the real benefit, right? And then to go back to Peter Drucker, you can't manage what's not measured. So you have to have some level of metric to be able to say, well, this is how we get to our target states, and this is how it makes the most sense. I think that actually Jez Humble, when he was at GSA, he talked about CALMS, and that being an acronym where he talks about culture being important for DevOps and automation and learning and measurement and then sharing. So some of those elements are very important. So I don't say spend too much time on your strategy. You have to start doing proof of concept, testing it out, experimenting, failing, learning, and then doing it over again. But we have to adopt some of the best practices that are being exhibited by some of the market leaders.
Now we're just barely touching a topic we could have many sessions on. What comes to mind are what resources do you use? I guess CCOE being one.
Yeah, definitely use the CCOE in terms of best practices. In terms of specific cloud-specific technology, there's. I always tell people start with vendor neutral. I love Azure, AWS, all the big players, but start with vendor neutral. Get your concepts right. Oftentimes, people are not even using the terms correctly, right? They're interchangeable and they have different meanings. And before you get your teams trained, right?
So a lot of education.
A lot of education. Before you get into contracting and acquisition, do knowledge acquisition first, because and they have to be on the same page. The organization has to be on the same page. They have to know, kind of going back to what Darryl was saying, they have to know why we're doing this, right? And that's really important. If it's better resiliency, right? What is the end mission or business outcome that we're after? And if that's not clear, that's the stakeholders don't have the buy-in, then it's going to be a really difficult path, because there's a lot of inertia against any kind of change, but specifically cloud. It's so nebulous still. I think people are still talking about servers. They say, well, I have a bunch of servers, I want to put them in the cloud. Well, great, but you're not going to get the benefits of the cloud. You can do that, that's great, and you can say you're in the cloud. So we need to it's a change in mindset, so we need to get there.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to add something to that.
Ahead.
There are a couple of mantras that I focus on and I tend to use in evaluating solutions. One, we are in a platform era, right? Many of the things that we get or acquire are in platform-based, so it has many applications in one overall platform. So since we are in a platform era, we have to look at platform exploitation. Being able to maximize the use within a particular product and then move forward to adding on, right? Because a lot of times when I have conversations with vendors, they're like, oh, okay, you can just add us on top. Add us on top. And I say, that sounds like another bill to me. It doesn't sound like I'm going down in the cost. And it may add 1% of capability, but is there an opportunity for me to talk to the platform and say, well, can you add that 1%, right? Since we're making significant investment. The other thing is application rationalization and just being able to onboard and offboard. There are so many interesting products, but if we commit ourselves to just adding on without that rationalization piece and saying, oh, well, we need to offboard some stuff if we don't have uses. Because when we think about software license management can kill you, right? If you have more licenses that aren't getting used, then you should know that. That should be part of the analysis that you are doing. And also just secure by design, right? So being able to look at design thinking and saying, okay, well, how can we be secure by design? But also, how can we use design thinking to understand the needs of our customer base? And lastly, I would say that creation of the immaculate customer experience. It's an aspirational goal. But at the same time, if you focus on that, which you are delivering, you're iterating to get to that ideal goal and the aspirational goal versus just focusing on, just the MVP. Actually, I think it was Wayne Chang that said, you don't want to look for the minimum viable product, but the minimum lovable product. And that actually is what creates greater conversation.
Excellent. Syed, did you have something?
I can say so much, but I'll just share one quick anecdote in terms of customer experience, right? The cloud is really the backbone of, I think, the modern customer experience. You're going to have a really hard time delivering those beautiful customer experiences without the cloud or similar modern infrastructure. And the example I want to share is everybody, I assume here, pays their taxes, right? There's one agency that processes your taxes when you file your tax return, and there's another agency, another system that collects the payment. And I happen to work at Treasury on the system that collects all the federal revenue, which is about, if I remember correctly, it was 3.5 trillion that my system collected. A really important system, as you can imagine, right? Provides the funding for a majority of 75% for the federal government, a lot of revenue. Can't have it go down, right? But the problem with many such legacy systems is the user experience is antiquated. It's from the 90s, right? People do not want to use it. And there's a lot of best practices, especially in, I'm sure you guys have heard of the nudge units, behavioral economics, just simple tweaking of those systems and those experiences a little bit. You can actually make really meaningful impact. In this example, you can collect more revenue. You can have better compliance. You can have better experience being delivered at the airports, and I can go on and on. But you're not going to get that user experience. I think they're talking about some kind of legislation or executive order about customer experience. You gotta get to the cloud.
So to wrap this up, this has been a fascinating discussion, and we could really dig into lots of different areas here. If you had one parting thought or a takeaway that you wanted to share with everyone in a form of a tweet, what would that be?
So I asked Karina before the event, is it the 140 character tweet or the 280? I think my parting thought would really be, it's a marathon. It really is a marathon, and I found myself getting frustrated and impatient at certain times because, we are 7, it'll be 8 years into this, right? This is going to be a generational, and I know it sounds kind of crazy. A lot of this is generational because, with the new consumers, new citizens, new stakeholders, as they demand some of these services, it's going to be inevitable, that the cloud becomes the standard, right? For any application, any service, it's going to be expected that it's mobile. I think ITIF came up with a report recently. A lot of the federal websites are still not mobile friendly. Well, I'm not surprised, because people are not demanding it. As more people demand it, and as more innovative offerings by vendors are enabled and offered in the marketplace, the customer, the government, is going to become much more, I guess, I don't want to use the word demanding, but we're going to expect a lot more. And because the citizens and the stakeholders are going to expect a lot more. So we're going to have to rise to the occasion. I know that doesn't fit 280 characters. But
expect more,
yeah,
do more?
Yeah. I'd say it's a marathon. Be patient and carry on.
Nice. Darryl?
I'll end by saying continuously iterate, continuously innovate. Deliver now and focus on delivering wow.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys.